Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Democrats' sweeping voting rights law could work. Whether or not you think it could work depends on where you stand on a number of the issues that are proposed in it. The expansive measure, according to the New York Times, would set a nationwide floor on ballot access, nullify many voting restrictions, change the way political districts are drawn, and rein in campaign donations. We're going to break it down and share with you exactly what's in it because, here we try to judge things based on their merit and not just merely on where they stand politically. But we're also going to look at why did this come about, right? Well, some things like the voting rights bill in Texas that you've heard about, maybe that was overblown. Maybe it wasn't. There's a lot to discuss, including could it even pass, right? Well, Senator Joe Manchin could prove to be a problem for Democrats' plans. Any conversation, though, on politics and the future of voting rights in the United States couldn't possibly be complete without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Sounds like the Democrats and Justin have a multitudinous amount of things for us to talk about today. Multitudinous, the word of the day, multitudinous. 5 syllables, meaning very numerous or many. So I guess I was being redundant when I said multitudinous many. But so we have a multitudinous amount of things to discuss here in the Democrats' bill under the voting rights. It's interesting that what's brought us to this point, right? To talk about all this. But as we read and did our research, we found out that this was stuff that many Republicans had been bringing up since 2017. So again, when you look at this in a historical perspective, it's always been one part or the other that have talked about this for decades. So maybe it just should stay the same. If neither one of them like it, or they both like it at certain times, then maybe it's not the laws that are bad. Maybe it's just a power grab. I don't know. Let's talk about the details, and you folks can decide for yourself and let us know at podcast@thestateofus.org. That's podcast@thestateofus.org. Let us know how you feel about these issues that are on the plate as far as voting rights are concerned.
Send us an email, please, as you're listening to today's episode. So the article points out, and I think this is important, there's 5 parts that we're going to discuss today. And there's a lot more in it, by the way, than that. Like, for example, some things like support for District of Columbia statehood, things that are not part of these 5 parts. It's not to say they're not important, but these are the 5 parts that explicitly deal with voting rights on a national level, and we're limited on time, so they're what we can discuss today. But the article points out that Republicans have assailed this law as a Democratic effort to rig the political system in their favor, even as some Lance privately acknowledge that the bill's broad aims are overwhelmingly popular, even among conservatives. This is a case, right, of if you go into this with an open mind, my guess is most of our listeners are going to come away like Lance and I are with a lot of this sounds pretty sensible. There's a few pieces in here that are well, okay, maybe not. But most of it, on the whole, it sounds like, well, yeah, this stuff makes sense. So let's get into it, see what you think, and let us know as we go through it.
Well, not only does it make sense, but there are many states, in some cases, a majority of the states who are already doing something exactly like this or very similar to it. So it's not like it's brand new witchcraft that somebody's been stirring to leak out over the country. These are many ideas that have already been used in other places, and there is no problem with them. So why not just expand it to cover all the different states? But go ahead.
So the first part, Lance, that speaks to the broader bill and the way to think about it is that it sets a national floor, okay, for elections. The article says ballot access, but really when you read the whole thing, what you get in mind is basically the sense that the goal of it, right, is to say this is the minimum of what you can do. Think about this a lot like minimum wage, right? The federal minimum wage. Most states have a minimum wage that is higher than the federal minimum wage, but it's not legal to be below it. So you can have something that's better, right? You just can't have something that's worse. And that's how much of this is structured, is if you want to go beyond this and build on top of it, you certainly can, but you can't do any less than what's being prescribed here. Now, the exception there, and this is like, Lance, I don't know, I guess they listened to the State of Us and they stole the idea, right? Jurisdictions could ignore the rules for state and local elections. This whole thing about, because there's this big back and forth, right? Democrats have said for a long time, well, it just should be for everything. And then Republicans say, but that, infringes on states' rights to dictate how their elections are managed. And I think you and I have been saying for a while, this is stupid. If it's a federal election, then the federal government should decide how the election is run. And if it's not a federal election, then states and local municipalities should probably decide how it's run. Generally speaking, that seemed like a simple answer to that complicated question of where do you draw that line without infringing on states and local rights, but at the same time saying when we have a national election, if Lance lives in Ohio and Sally lives in California, they have different options in terms of voting, and they may not have the same access to voting. And that doesn't seem, if we're all voting for the same thing, right? If we're all voting on president, why doesn't everybody vote in the same manner or have the same options, right?
Seems logical to me. I don't,
Yeah.
I mean, again, and if you're worried about states' rights, then you can run your local and state elections any way you want. And
Right.
the bill allows for that. The other point is that you hear a lot of people saying is, well, the Democrats are trying to make it so that more people will vote for the Democrats. But, it's clear that allowing more people to vote is going to benefit both parties. And as the article points out, Republicans have increasingly appealed to lower income and less educated voters. And some experts say the restrictions that they have imposed may actually be cutting into turnout by people who want to vote for them.
So Republicans are doing things that are bad for Republicans.
Right. Because we know that with President Trump, we saw more of those kinds of people that the article talks about want to vote or go out and vote for Donald Trump as president. So, by arguing against this, are the Republicans cutting off their nose to spite their face? And that's why when you said in the opening that the article says, yeah, there are a lot of Republicans in the background who say, yeah, on the surface, we agree with a lot of these things because we see, we have to stick to the party line because, Mitch McConnell will cut our nose off, cut off our right index finger if we go against what he wants the Republicans to say en masse. But really, this would help me in my local election. This would help me get reelected in my state. This would help me get reelected in my, state, in my national legislature. So just throwing that out there as well. When you talk about some of these changes, there does seem to be some bipartisan support behind the curtain, just not publicly.
The next one is the measure makes it much easier to register to vote. Okay. All voters would be able to register, designate party affiliations, change addresses, and deregister online. 40 states and the District of Columbia already offer some or all of those options. Voters.
There's the point, right? We said in the opening
the
that
vast majority
of states already do this. So it's like, this isn't earth shattering.
Yep.
Oh my God, look what they're trying to do. Most states already do this. 80%.
Exactly. Voters would also be automatically registered when visiting state or federal agencies unless they explicitly decline, similar to what has been required of most states but not always carried out by the federal motor voter law that passed in 1993. Also, early voting would be expanded nationwide with all jurisdictions off. Well, hold on. Before I go on to early voting, let me just mention something about the online registration thing. Lance and I have talked about this for years. Registering to vote should not be, this big, complicated thing. And in fairness, in most states, it is not. If you want to register to vote, you can register to vote. It's not that complicated. Now, Could it be easier? Could it be less confusing? Sure, it could be, because in many cases, it's still not as easy probably as it should be. And if you don't know what to do, figuring it out, the state websites, all of that stuff, not nearly as clear as they could be. The big caveat I'm going to put in here for folks that are worried about fraud, and I think not fraud, but criminal activity is what I'm going to use here, okay? We already know, right, that China and Russia are interested in meddling in our elections, and they've been doing it in unprecedented ways in recent elections, trying to influence things on social media. The more that we're going to rely on online technology, and notice that I don't say if, right? I'm just saying that we're going to. This is going to happen, right? Whether it happens with this bill or another one, I think it's going to happen either way, Lance. We have to take our cybersecurity in this country, right? And the way that we go about ensuring that these systems are secure more seriously. And we have to do a better job of educating lawmakers and requiring lawmakers to be educated on cybersecurity threats and foreign powers.
Yeah, no, I think your point's well taken. But before we move on, I just want to mention, it talks about early voting would be expanded nationwide. And it also says all but a handful of states already allow early voting. And the law says that they have to have the opportunity for 15 days for 10 hours a day at easily accessible polling places. And I know you love averages, Justin, but the average early ballot period is 19 days.
Yes.
So again, most states are already doing this, and they're doing more than what the bill requires. It's just making it accessible to the same it's just making it accessible for all of us, no matter where we live in the United States. And that seems like a pretty common sense thing to me. Like you said, whether I live in Oregon or Ohio or Missouri or Alabama or Colorado, we should all be voting under the same law. Our ballot should be counted the same way.
We still have to look at some of the voting restrictions that would be rolled back, gerrymandering and political contributions all as part of this. So there's plenty more to talk about. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Setting a national floor for ballot access and voting. That's basically the main way to think about this. And so far, I mean, I'm curious if you're out there, are there any items so far that you really object to strongly? Lance and I have added some notations. Like, I think we need to look at that one ballot box for every 20,000. I think there needs to be a geographic component to that, right? That ballot boxes should be no further than X or something, right? I mean, there's more investigation there. That's a little too in particular. And same thing, I didn't see anything, right, in the online stuff about what type of security states are going to be required to follow for their online processes. And I think that, I mean, that's just, okay, we're going to do this. Let's make sure that Russia, China, et cetera, aren't going to hack it. North Korea, we don't want people like that hacking our election systems. So there are some things that need to be added, but on the whole, what do you think? Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. Moving on to the next item, Lance, Republicans have won enactment of voter ID laws in most states by arguing that they are needed to combat fraud, even though the sort of in-person fraud that such rules would discourage is all but non-existent. The bill would effectively nullify such laws, allowing voters to sign affidavits swearing to their identities rather than showing an ID. This particular provision is one that I don't know. I guess I wouldn't say that I'm fully against it. I do think, for what it's worth, that the extent to what some Republicans legislators have tried to do to require certain types of voter ID and what types aren't allowed, and intentionally making it confusing, that's bad. Just signing an affidavit to swear that I am who I say I am. I'd love to believe that, most Americans are that honest. But at the same time, so I show up and I swear that I'm Lance Jackson. and I get to vote. And then Lance shows up later that day and said, well, you can't vote. You already voted today, according to what we have down. I guess what I'm concerned about here is I don't see the backup for how are we going to handle any of that kind of stuff in a timely fashion. Because the minute that this is enacted, then there's going to be problems with it.
Well, this is a problem area because you have the arguments that you've brought up, and then you have my argument, two arguments that I have here. And that is, one, if you're going to look at my signature, I'm not one of these people that have practiced my signature. I sign it differently depending on who I'm signing it for, the mood I'm in, and all those kinds of things. And so I guess if they really wanted, now when I sign it to vote, I try to sign it like the one that I put on my registration so they don't throw my ballot out. But I don't like that, okay, at all. And the Friendly Redneck Liberal doesn't like ID control either, because that is so simple for the government. And here's where I go down the rabbit hole, and I'll try not to do that. But it's like, I just don't trust this whole idea of assigning everybody a number. I mean, I don't like Social Security. I know it's there because of the process, but I don't like identifying everybody. I don't like all your technology that you're talking about, because I think that makes it too easy for the government to take control. So not getting into the conspiracy theory, but I don't have an answer. And so it's hard for me to complain here, because that's my attitude, is I don't have a better solution because I don't like it either way.
My thing here would be, you need to show at a minimum a state identification, and new caveat, to get just a state ID, not a driver's license. Okay. But like in the state of Ohio, for example, you don't want a driver's license. That's fine. You need an ID. You can go to the BMV. You can get a state ID, right? Doesn't let you drive, doesn't let you do anything, but it says, we know that this person is who they say they are. Here's their photo. Here's their information.
But for all those people who say, let's go back to the way it was with our founding fathers, they had no ID. They had no state ID.
Yep, just sign
they
a ledger.
Walked up, and then they couldn't even sign. Put your X here. Put your mark on the ballot.
Yeah, make your mark.
Make your mark, and we counted it.
Yep.
Right? You want to go back to the founding? I mean, there's where I'm coming from. You know what I'm saying? And I interrupted, and and I'm sorry, but it's like, why? I mean, I get the willies when you say, well, go get the state ID card. I don't want the state to know.
Yeah.
But why should that be a criteria for me to vote? Because historically, I didn't need that to vote.
Yep. But as I've talked about before when we've discussed this, obviously, and to your point about Social Security and so forth, you're already in the system, folks. So and with the NSA and with the this and the that, right? You're already in the system. Whether or not you have an ID doesn't change what the government knows about you or not. The ID is more of a formality of being able to prove to people that aren't the government that you are who you say you are. Some other options that have been proposed here that other people are uncomfortable with for various reasons, things like, make your mark, right? Well, some people have thought about, okay, well, what about fingerprint, identification for voting? Okay, but now everybody has to be fingerprinted. So there's different ways to go about this, because ID cards, of course, can be forged and all that, right? But they're getting more secure all the time. That's an ongoing thing. So I guess I would say the mitigation, right, would be you could require at least a state. Federal is obviously higher than state, so a federal ID is okay too, but a state photo ID, and make sure that state photo IDs are free to get at BMVs, paid for through taxes. So they're not really free, but the thinking is that everybody has access to them. They don't cost money, so that can't be an objection to, well, I can't get a state ID because I can't afford it. Okay, well, you don't have to afford it because it's paid for through taxes. So you can go get your state ID. I'm not talking about licenses, because that's different, right? Driving isn't a right, it's a privilege. So some things to think about
Just
there.
like flying, huh?
Right. Yeah.
Because now you got to have certain papers so you can fly. Because being an American and being able to board a plane, that's not good enough anymore. You got to be able to prove that you've been vetted by the federal government.
That's right. Flying is not a right; it is a privilege, at least according to the government. So, depending on who you ask. Another item that they included in here, which again, this is one Lance and I think have supported for a long time, so it should be simple, It also restores voting rights to felons who have completed their sentences, cementing into law a practice that states have increasingly adopted, but some, such as Florida, have resisted. Folks, if we permanently punish people who have served what we said the punishment was, that's like that whole thing with kids they tell us not to do, Lance, right? It's what's the punishment? When the punishment's done, move on. If you don't do that, then you just confuse people and you make it more likely that they'll make other mistakes because they don't understand the punishment process. Why, if you have served your sentence, are you not allowed to vote? Sorry, I think that's the most asinine thing. No, you did what you did something bad. You were found guilty. You were punished, and now the punishment's over. It's like the box thing that we've talked about on employment applications and permanently punishing people when sometimes they've been jailed for things that are like, not even very serious. Like, well, I got caught with a little marijuana 10 years ago and I can't vote. I mean, what? Okay. So there's things like that are, I think that's a simple one, hopefully. I know some people maybe don't feel that way, but most states, like it says, are already doing this on their own. It's just...
Well, the point is if you've ever punished your children, when the punishment is over, you give them a big hug and you love them and you welcome them back in the household and you move on, right?
Well, you should.
And we need to, and we need to apply that same principle throughout society.
The next one's a big one that we've talked about for a long time. Partisan gerrymandering would end, or at least would get better, you hope. A number of states have established nonpartisan commissions so that maps are drawn not by the legislatures, but by these commissions. And if they refuse to approve a map, then a 3-judge panel would take over the drafting. A number of states have actually already done this. Ohio voters, yay, we make it in there, Lance. Ohio voters actually, I remember voting on this, did vote to amend the Ohio Constitution to require this, and it starts, I believe, next year in time for the midterms, I think. So it's going to be interesting to see how it works out, I guess. I think Ohio, Colorado are going to be good case studies in how these nonpartisan commissions play out and whether or not they really are that way. It does point out, too, that critics like Arizona's Republican governor have stacked the selection process for the state's commission. However, the legislation that Democrats are proposing here actually lays out detailed instructions for how panel members have to be chosen. So like what Ohio, Colorado, and Arizona are doing are not all the same right now necessarily. This would provide a uniform standard for who sits on those commissions, how they're selected, etc. I don't know if you can ever free it from partisanship, but can you make it better than it is right now? Absolutely, because it was once better than it is right now. You look historically at when gerrymandering really got out of control, and there was a time when we didn't struggle with this as much as we do. It's bad. It's not good. It divides us further. It unfairly benefits parties. It's bad. It's a bad thing. Gerrymandering's not good. It's bad for us, the people. The only thing that's good for are parties, political parties, not people, and not the country. So
yeah, the statement in the article, partisan gerrymandering would end. I just shake my head, and I wrote down these are 2 quick notes. I don't think this would work. Is it good to try? I agree with you, because any improvement is better than what we have. And then I also wrote down, not sure there is any way to take the politics out of it. Because if you have a 3-person panel, okay, you have either 3 people who all feel differently about it, which means, okay, now where you go, or it's a 2-to-1 vote. And so it's, and their own, it's like when you say, well, they're a judge, they just interpret the law. Okay, but your belief system, maybe not your political party, but your belief system
probably has an impact
on the way that you interpret.
Sure.
So I think this is a difficult one, but like you said, any opportunity to try to improve it, 2 thumbs up from the friendly redneck liberal.
Yeah. Well, there's You want to really scare the friendly redneck liberal? We have an episode coming up on artificial intelligence, folks.
Oh, I'm there. No, you're not scaring me. I'm just telling you.
Just hand over the drawing of political maps to machines.
I'm reading this dystopian novel now, and it's like, oh, this is what's going on right now. Huh. Written in 1986, and it's occurring right now, people. So this is not as far-fetched, but we won't go there yet. We'll try to keep it above board.
So we've got one more piece to discuss, and that's political contributions would be reined in. This perhaps is the one that's gonna rustle the most feathers for folks. And then the last one's to talk about a little bit about Senator Manchin. So we've got more to discuss, and we want your thoughts. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org, podcast@thestateofus.org. Political contributions being reined in. Could it work? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Willer.
The legislation tries to stop the flow of money to campaigns from abroad by requiring political committees to report foreign contacts, outlawing the use of shell companies to launder foreign contributions, and barring foreigners from advising PACs on contributions and other political efforts. This first part, Lance, I got no problem with. We should be able to know who's donating, money from overseas, where it's coming from, why it's coming. Yeah, I don't love the way the law is right now, that there's nice, easy ways to skirt all that. And it's designed that way on purpose. It's designed so that lawmakers can say, oh, yeah, we have provisions in place, but there's ways around all of them that are really not terribly complicated.
So they can get their money.
Yes. The provisions would also counter the Supreme Court's 2010 decision in Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission that independent expenditures are a form of free speech protected by the Constitution. The ruling effectively allowed nonprofit groups to spend unlimited amounts of money, $750 million in 2020, according to the advocacy group Open Secrets, to support or oppose candidates or causes while keeping donors anonymous. There's big holes in the Citizens United situation, right? And that's like a whole episode on its own. Have to be careful, though, because if you're friendly redneck liberal of his own volition, right, wants to take his money and put up a billboard right outside our hometown of Urbana that says Joe Biden sucks, right? That is a form of free speech, right? I mean, yep. I think we could all agree that if that's truly what happened, Lance wasn't contacted by anybody. He just wants to put that thing up there, right? All on his own. And nobody gave him the money, right? It's his money. He earned it. He's spending it. He's putting it up. I got no problem with that. Now, do I have a problem with one of Lance's friends who works for a political party having contacted him and saying, let's set up this nonprofit and then you can donate to it and then this other guy can donate to it and then we can put up this board and we'll keep it a secret that you donated? Yeah, now we're getting into like, no, I don't think so. Because unfortunately, that part of it is abused. If it was used in the first scenario that we described, I don't have an issue with it. The second scenario, yeah, not good. Because that's how it becomes not Lance spent, $800 on a billboard. That's how it becomes $800 million was spent by people. And we have no idea who it was, no idea what their affiliations are, and no idea why they might do something like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't put up a billboard like that. I would put up something that was positive, put a positive twist on it.
I would hope so.
But I agree with you. But I have the hard part about this as you were reading that is that, well, it goes against what the Supreme Court has already said. So even if you pass this as a law, there's going to be some citizen, some lawyer somewhere who takes this to the Supreme Court and says, wait a minute, this law is in violation of the court. I know what we want. Again, right? It's that age-old adage. Every rule you make, there's somebody out there who's trying to find a way that they can get around it. But to your point, it is a good idea that people, to try to stop some of this money. If you want to do it, it's your money, you should be allowed to do it. But if we can tie up some of the loopholes, like you explained, that's a good thing. I'm in support of that.
This next one, I think simple for us. Use of political advertising on the internet, requiring for the first time that ads disclose their sponsors and that online companies keep a public list of political advertising buyers. Yeah.
Hey, is this now meaning Facebook and Amazon, all those people are starting to get it? That our representatives and senators are understanding how this works, and they're going to have to now make these companies, oh, you have to play by the same rules as everybody else because we finally understand what you're doing. Is that what's happening here?
Because if Lance wants to put up that billboard, right, the thing that we left out is at the bottom of the billboard, it has to say paid for by Lance Jackson, right? Because we need to know where that money come from.
Or the committee to reelect Lance Jackson.
Right, or whatever, but it has to tell us something about who paid for this.
Exactly.
And it's crazy.
Full disclosure, right? That's all we need is full disclosure.
That online companies, now Facebook, in fairness to them, in recent years has already taken the steps requiring that all political ads disclose that.
But probably because they know that this kind of stuff is coming, right?
Right, yeah. And there's lots of websites and places you could buy ads and stuff where that's not required. So, yeah, duh.
So see, your old politicians are starting to get with it and realizing that
sort of
we got to do something about this Facebook thing.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is, but by God, they're talking bad about me, and we got to do something about it.
That's right. It's causing trouble. Now, this last one's kind of interesting, Lance. Finally, the measure would set up new funds to match small donations to Senate and presidential candidates. And you say, well, where are they going to get the money to match this stuff? Well, it would be raised through fines on corporate lawbreakers and tax cheats. And then it would be available only to candidates who reject political donations of more than $1,000. This may be, of all the pieces in the legislation, like the most liberal and democratic component of the whole thing. Like, what? We had all this other stuff, and then there's like this last little thing that, oh yeah, by the way, we're just going to throw this thing in here, and we're going to match all these donations, and we're going to do it by fining people, corporate lawbreakers, and tax cheats, which I'm all great with using the money from, corporate lawbreakers and tax cheats to do some good. I think absolutely, because, nobody dislikes corporate lawbreakers and tax cheats more than I do, but what? I don't know. I feel like there's big holes here.
Hey, just have your friends write a check for $999 and we'll do that a million times. And then I'll get to go into this fund over here and take out all the money I need to run.
Right.
Come on. It doesn't take a genius to figure out how to beat this one.
There's some issues here. Now, the one thing that I think would be interesting to explore with this, Lance, that I will say is rather than saying rejecting political contributions of over a certain dollar amount, because we know for years there's ways around this, folks. And, frankly, if I want to give somebody $5,000, what if I only make $20,000 a year, but I just believe it, and that may sound far-fetched, but there's some people out there that don't make a lot of money who will give a lot of money to very specific things, a huge portion of their income. Why should they be prevented from doing that or punished? The way I would change this.
There are people that tithe their income to the church.
Exactly.
Which is,
right.
Most people say, well, I'd never give that kind of money to a politician.
Right.
But there are people that do, but they give it to their church or they give it to, save the animals or, whatever.
Yeah. And they might give big, large sums. So the capping of, in single contributions, item for a different conversation. But I think the better way to do it, Lance, would be to say how much money has a campaign raised. And if they've raised over a certain amount, I don't know what that threshold is, then they're not eligible for this, right? If they're under a certain amount, then hey, maybe let's try to help them get the word out a little bit more to help the field be more diverse. Because we know for a long time the political insider game is a big. So I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm just throwing it out there for our listeners to think about and provide some input on. It would definitely take some tweaking, but that would, to me, make a lot more sense than saying we'll just limit it to 1,000. Because like Lance just outlined, okay, there's lots of ways around that, right? Why don't we you can only take this money if your total campaign contributions are under a certain amount. I don't know. Something to think about. Email us podcast@thestateofus.org. And all this can be wrapped up, Lance, right, by saying that all fine and dandy, but Senator Joe Manchin says he's not going to vote for this. And the real I guess, I don't know if it's irony or what it is just that he agrees with the substance of the legislation purportedly, but disagrees with passing it along partisan lines.
It's his way of trying to get bipartisanship. I don't think it's going to work because, as he said, yeah, I've got people talking to me, but I don't have 60 votes for what I want either. So I'll give him kudos. I think he's going to take a hit here. I do think there's probably some political power at play here because because the Democrats have come to him and said, hey, what do you want, Joe? Tell us what you want. We'll give you whatever you want so you'll vote for us. So is he holding out for the best deal possible? Or does he truly believe this? And as some of the Democrats point out, it's like, okay, it's great that he's representing his state the way he is, but he's talking about bipartisanship and he's not playing ball with, half of the Senate. So it's a mess. Bottom line is nothing's getting done. Things will stay the same. And it's too bad because nobody will move off of dead center because they won't have the discussions. And that's why we do this show, right? Is because we're all about the discussions. It's like, I just had this conversation yesterday with one of my daughters and she was talking to one of her friends. And I said, you need to listen to our show because they're like, well, I don't agree with this person on topic X. So therefore I can't be friends with them. And I said, are you kidding me? Really? You agree on 8 other things, but because you don't agree on whatever it is that you disagree on, that person cannot be your friend. You can't go to dinner with them. You can't have a conversation with them. And they said, yeah, that's the way I feel. And I said, well, that's what's the matter with our political system and with our country today, is that I may agree with you on 5 or 6 things, disagree with you with 1 or 2, and then we agree that we can't even speak to one another anymore. That's wrong, people. And our mission here at True Chat is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. We've got to have those, okay? We find out when we start to talk to people, we usually agree with most people on more things than we disagree with them about. And we can't solve the things that we disagree on if we're not even going to have a conversation. So that's what we do here. We try to have a conversation. We're glad you listen. Share the show with other people. Tell them that they need to listen so that we can have these conversations and find some answers to some of these problems. Where can you find us? Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
I just mentioned, Lance, as you were talking, I was thinking about there's some conversation that some Republicans do support components of this if it wasn't in one massive bill so that they didn't have to vote on everything, including the stuff they don't agree on. Democrats don't want to break it up. Isn't it more important that we get something done rather than nothing?
Well, so that's what we say, right?
So break it up, pass what you can pass, and call it a day rather than pass nothing. Do something. The State of Us, folks, is released Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. East as a podcast and heard on the weekends in select talk radio markets around the country. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.